Hey guys, it's Austin here with the Wood Dock, and today in this video I'm going to show you how I made a Danish cord style stool. Stick around and enjoy. So I started out by selecting the lumber I wanted to use, which is just some leftover ambrosia maple from a previous project, and began marking out the dimensions that I wanted, as well as starting to decide kind of the overall shape of what will become the arches. You'll see in a second, it's kind of hard to explain, but here you'll see I'm drawing some angles, and then I'm going to be making a template, which is what that 1/4 inch MDF is going to be used for. And also you always need a sharp pencil, so quick break for that. I took some inspiration from Japanese architecture. I believe it's called a torii. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but it's this archway with these flared out sides, and I really like the way that looks. So I decided to use that as the overall shape of the front and back crossbars where I'll be attaching the weaved cord. So here I'm just taking an inverted handheld belt sander and using it to rough shape and get my final template shape down. I really wish I had a larger tool, but in the shops that I usually work in, aka my garage in Pennsylvania and my parents' garage in New Hampshire, I really have limited space and I need tools that can really move around, and so using a handheld belt sander as well as a couple of hand saws can really get me down to the rough shape that I need relatively quickly. And so I think I have the shape right here, and I'm going to get it over to some of the pieces of wood that I've started to rough cut already, and then get it to a router table, a template route. By the way, for anyone who's just starting out woodworking, if you don't have double-sided tape in your workshop, I highly recommend it. I use it for everything, and it is the greatest thing when it comes to making a quick jig, to installing drawer fronts, and here even for doing some quick template routing. Some good double-sided tape is really strong and will keep the template surface on really tight, and honestly, actually sometimes it's kind of hard to take off, but I'd rather have it that way than have it come off mid-routing. Here I'm just using a 1-inch flush trim bit to get down to that final shape, and I'm really happy with this bit that I just purchased. It's actually a Bosch 1-inch, like I said. I think it's 1/4 inch in diameter. In any case, I think I got a little too aggressive personally, and you'd notice that there was a little chipped piece on one of the flared out wings of this arch, and I was a little annoyed by that, but at the end of the day I actually ended up just taking the arches over to my belt sander again and shaping them down so that they were symmetric, and after that I was good to go. Man, I am always impressed when I use this handheld belt sander. I purchased it from someone off of Facebook Marketplace a while back, and it's this old Ryobi sander, but it really pulls its weight. So now here I'm just taking some more maple, not ambrosia maple, but that's actually not going to matter because I'm going to be ebonizing the wood. We'll get to that in a little bit. Here I'm just thickness planing it down so that it's the same exact thickness as the two arches I just made, so I can construct the rest of the body of the stool. Once I was able to do that, I took the piece of maple to the table saw and cut it down to some final thicknesses. Thick Nye, I always think of Four Eyes Furniture and Sean Boyd when I say that, but shout out to them. In any case, getting these cut down so that they'll be the proper thickness for some cross stretchers as well as the legs of the stool. And I'm also going to be adding some tapers that you'll see in a minute. Once I had all those pieces cut down, I selected a couple that I really liked that I thought would be great for the legs, and now I'm able to use the other pieces to get a final length for some cross stretches like I mentioned before. It's kind of hard to imagine this, but once you see the stool kind of come to shape, you'll realize where all these pieces are going to be assembled into. I know what you guys are all thinking. What is that really, for lack of a better term, janky looking jig? And it is a very simple taper jig that I made a while back and used it on my coffee table, used it on a side table, and now I'm just reusing it here. I want to get some of those toggle clamps to kind of make this a more legit jig so that I can reuse it a lot more, but for now, a couple overarching pieces of scrap wood did the trick. And so now you're gonna see that tapered leg come into play with this archway, and I think it really lends to a more modern style of furniture. And here this actually looks very similar to that Tory arch that I was describing earlier. If you guys don't know what that is, I recommend googling it because you'll realize it's pretty similar. After that, I just needed to run some dowels into these pieces so I could attach them with a little bit of strength. And so here I am drilling the holes to attach some dowels. Once I had all the dowel holes drilled out, I started the glue up, and here I'm going to be doing the glue up in a couple different phases. First, I'm going to glue the legs to the archway, and this way I can cut the cross section or crossbar to final length once I have this all glued up and set, and I can just measure on the inside. Something to note, the taper is actually set on the inside so that the outside of the legs are parallel and that they are perpendicular with the top of the crossbar, and that just allows me to do this first glue up. And so I'm going to glue these both together and then go from there. Ultimately, this stool isn't really going to be used for sitting. I'm making it more so to hold a small plant or just as a decorative addition to the new townhouse that I'm going to be moving into. And so I don't need a ton of strength here. I'm just going to be gluing these cross stretchers in without any dowels. Wood glue is pretty strong anyways, and I made sure to do an initial light layer to kind of seal the end grain, and then I came back and added more glue to get a better, I guess, joint or a better connection with that cross stretcher. And so once those were all glued up and I let them dry overnight, I came back and used a 1/8 inch round over bit to give it a nicer, more modern profile to kind of lend to that same style that I was talking about earlier. And so here I'm just doing that on all the edges before I do the next glue up. A couple more holes for dowels here, just doing that to connect the front and back panels, and we shall start to see this stool come together in its final shape. Before I glue these cross stretchers between the front and back panel together to create the final stool form, I went ahead and marked out and drilled the holes for the nails that I'll be using to tie down the Danish paper cord. You'll also notice, at least when you see the nails in place, that the spacing is a little different, and you have to space the nails differently in order to get the proper weaving pattern if you want to do a traditional Danish cord style weave. And then it gets a little bit more complicated when it comes to the interweaving between the actual cord to make it look continuous. You'll see later on in the video, but for now I got those all drilled out and I can get to gluing it all together and then letting it clamp for about 24 hours before I get some sanding and stain on. Two things you might notice. One, I'm no longer in my parents' garage at this point. During this quarantine period, I quarantined with my parents for about 3.5 weeks, and then came down to my girlfriend's, whose feet you see in this video, to quarantine for another 2.5-3 weeks, extending past that 14-day recommended period, just to get some time with her, but also get a change in scenery. And so you'll be seeing a lot of the next parts of this video done at her apartment, and using the limited space, I'm currently gluing up and now chiseling away at some glue excess and doing a little bit of sanding on her patio to prepare for a little bit of staining. You might see some extra holes on the outside of those cross stretchers, and I had accidentally drilled on the wrong side. Good thing that there's going to be some cord wrapped around so you won't be able to see them. But after a little bit of sanding, I went to the kind of final finishing step, which is applying some stain. And so here I'm actually using India ink, specifically speedball India ink, to ebonize the wood, or turn it into this black ebony style wood. And the great thing about using speedball ink specifically, not to mention the fact that it's jet black, which is fantastic, that's the color I wanted, but it actually has shellac mixed into it to give it a more protective finish, which I really love. It doesn't have any sheen, it just gets a nice matte finish, and so I was able to get that on, get a couple coats, and do a final set of sanding before I started to nail in some L nails here. quick note on these, I actually wasn't able to source traditional L nails at the time during this whole pandemic. It just wasn't really feasible to get them from the only place I could find them, which was overseas in Europe. And so I actually took some brad nails and hand bent them. And it does the same job. They might not be necessarily as strong, but I used some pretty thick L nails, and so you can see here I'm starting to wrap the cord around them, and it's holding tight, and I'm really happy with how those turned out so I can get weaving. Bet you can't tell by how fast that was that was my first time ever doing this. Just kidding, that was obviously a little bit of fast forward, but once I had that initial pattern down, I was able to do this interweaving to create that continuous look. As I mentioned previously, this is where that spacing comes into play, and so I had spaced each of these nails on the front back panel about an inch in between to allow about 4 cord wraps on most of them, except for the 2 end pieces, which I was only able to wrap, I believe, twice. And that allowed for that continuous look you see here. And so now I get to do the fun part, in my opinion, which is the cross weave to create the final pattern. I'm using a 5/32 of an inch thick paper cord, if anyone was wondering. But now that this is all done, I can finally get some shots of it to show off the beautiful stool I made. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end, guys. I know this was a longer video, but I hope you enjoyed the process as much as I enjoyed making this stool. If you don't already, feel free to subscribe to my channel. Hopefully I'll be getting more videos like this out on some of my more recent builds. And follow me on Instagram at _the_wood_doc. Until next time, thanks so much.